Next, we have speech by our chief guest, Dr. Michael Van Walt, President and co-founder of CREDA, a conflict resolution organization, and senior fellow at the Institute for Social Sciences, University of California at Davis, an international jurist, and author of The Status of Tibet, History, Rights, and Prospects in International Law. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Tash Dele, very happy Losar to everyone. Let us hope that the Iron Rat year will bring great positive changes for all of you, but also for all the Tibetans inside Tibet, and for the world, which is not in such a good state. As some of you may know, my colleague Mick and I were supposed to go to Ottawa in the past couple of days to present a new report that we have completed and to speak to members of parliament there, some people in the government, and so forth, regarding Tibet, regarding its history, and regarding the obligation of the Canadian government and other governments around the world to work towards ending the occupation of Tibet and resolving the conflict between China and Tibet. And so, of course, we were very disappointed when, because of bad weather, the program in Ottawa was cancelled. But at the same time, we feel that what has happened now is that this is the first place where we actually announce or inaugurate this report that we have written. And it seems to be a very auspicious place and time to do so. And so I am very happy. It's kind of a celebration for us because we've worked on this for 10 years, and I'm happy to be able to say that we've now completed it, that it is very conclusive, and we hope very useful. This is what it is. It's the Tibet Brief 2020, and I will say a couple of words about it, since this is the first place that we're actually saying anything about it. So this new report, which we hope to publish as a book as well, deals with the history of Tibet from the time of Genghis Khan in the 13th century to the early 20th century. It reviews the relations that Tibet had with the major empires of Asia, the Mongol, the Manchu, the Ming Empire, but also the British. And it then reviews the more modern history of Tibet during the time that after the end of the Manchu Qing Empire until the invasion in 1951. Now, we focused a lot of attention in this paper on the question, or perhaps on responding to the question, was Tibet ever a part of China? And we did so in part because China's insistence that Tibet has always been a part of China, or since antiquity, that Tibet has always been a part of China, is an obstacle to resolving any conflict between Tibet and China. And so we investigated with the help of and with the engagement of about 100 scholars around the world, scholars of Mongol, Manchu, Tibetan, Chinese, Persian, and other sources, to determine whether the Chinese claim that Tibet was always a part of China was true, and if so, what the situation was. And we did so because we realized that whether Tibet was part of China historically or not is very important. It's not just something that is of interest to historians. It is something that is important because if Tibet was not a part of China historically, then Tibet was invaded and occupied illegally. And that has consequences in international law, not just for China, not just for Tibet, but also for the international community, also for all other governments, also for the government of Canada, in terms of how they should behave towards the Tibetans, towards the Tibetan government, towards the PRC, and towards resolving the conflict, the Sino-Tibetan conflict. Now, the good news is that after this intensive, years-long period of research, the conclusion we have reached is that Tibet, in fact, was never a part of China. And so although we entered the process of research and discussions with scholars with some doubts and some trepidation about what the outcome might be, I can say now, and I feel very confident, that there is no reason to accept the position that Tibet was always a part of China. It is simply not true. It does not reflect the history. But part of the reason why I have doubts, and I think part of the reason why many people in the world, government leaders, officials of ministries of foreign affairs, perhaps some of your parliamentary colleagues, but I think also Tibetans that I've talked to, have some doubt about whether there may be some truth in what the Chinese government says that Tibet was for centuries part of China, is because the PRC, because Beijing, has very effectively, for the past 60 or 70 years, but especially in the last 20 years, has very forcefully and persistently pushed its historical version, its historical narrative, showing that Tibet was part of China. And I'm not going to go into the history here because it is a complicated one, but you're welcome to read it here. And any of you who want a copy, please arrange that I have your email and I will send you an electronic copy. The Chinese government have been very effective, and they've been so effective that together with their story about Tibet's history and their increased economic and political and military power, they have managed to convince many governments to make statements that they consider Tibet to be a part of China. This has happened primarily in the last 20 years. Canadian government, for example, in the 1950s, the legal division of the then Ministry of External Affairs wrote a report in which it concluded that Tibet was independent. But today, position has changed and there is doubt. And it is not just Canada, it is countries around the world that have doubt in their position or have stated that Tibet is part of China. And so one of the things we set out to do in meeting with government leaders and parliamentarians, and we hope to do it in different parts of the world, is to show to them that there is no reason to doubt that now there is no excuse to state that Tibet is part of China. Because if Tibet was not historically part of China, China did not receive sovereignty over Tibet by having invaded and occupied it. International law prohibits invasion and occupation. International law does not give sovereignty to the aggressor. In fact, the whole system of international law is set up to protect the victim and not to reward the aggressor. And by recognizing that Tibet is part of China, governments are rewarding the aggressor without any need for that. So if in the past it was because there was doubt about the history of Tibet, today we want to lay that doubt to rest. And that is why we prepared the report. So for Tibetans in particular, I believe it is very important for Tibetans to know their history, for the younger generation to feel confident about it. I believe that the older generation that lived in Tibet and came abroad had no doubts about Tibet having been independent because they lived it. But for some in the younger generation that hear different narratives, that Google the question, they will come across many different answers, depending on the political leanings of the ones that have entered the information and the sources that they have used. And later today, when I will be speaking with the youth, I would want to spend some time on this. But also I notice that because there is some doubt, and because of the effectiveness of the Chinese propaganda, many Tibetans are today even adopting Chinese terminology, Chinese words to describe things. And the most obvious example is describing the Tibetans in Tibet as a minority of China, or a minority of the PRC. Tibetans are not a minority. Tibetans are a people. They are a nation. They are an occupied country. And there is an enormous difference between the two. And from the point of view of international law, it makes all the difference in terms of the rights that the Tibetan people have because they are a people, because they're occupied. If you're a minority, you're at this end of the scale of rights. If you're a people and an occupied people or state, you're at that end of the scale of rights. And the international community will determine what may be a fair, a reasonable solution to the Sino-Tibetan conflict through negotiations or by any other means on the basis of what they understand are the rights of the Tibetan people and the rights and obligations of the PRC. And so if you cannot confidently articulate the rights of the Tibetans according to international law, then that will disadvantage you in any negotiations with China and in any advocacy with governments around the world. And so I understand that it is difficult to conceive of major change today for Tibet, given the strength of the position of China and the fact that so many governments, corporations, and others seem to want to favor China as a big power. But remember that nothing stays the same. everything changes. No empires have been eternal. And I personally have worked on numerous situations similar to that of Tibet, where nobody believed change was possible, with the Baltic states. And then the Soviet Union disintegrated and the Baltic states regained their lost independence. I worked with East Timor. East Timor was occupied just like Tibet, but by Indonesia, also a very strong regional power. Nobody believed that would be resolved the way it was. Indonesia was hit by an economic crisis, and the result was East Timor had a referendum and regained its independence. And there are other examples like this. So that today may not seem likely doesn't mean that tomorrow things will not change. They will. But again, in my experience, the only way that things are going to change in a way that will really resolve the conflict as you might want it to be resolved is if you remain engaged with the international community, you remain confident and active in articulating your position, which includes your history, with confidence, but also articulate your rights, because that is the basis on which a solution will have to be found. Thank you so much.